What's up, Internet? You're tuning to episode 151 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where two best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. We've got a fun one today. I guess it's technically bittersweet because we are going to be having a little bit of a retrospective on the Xbox 360 in honor of the fact that its storefront has officially closed after, 19 years?
19 years, yeah.
Yeah. Does that make you feel old? Because it makes me feel old to think that that console is 20 years old.
It does, but also, I don't know, like, I remember playing that console when I was a kid, so it's kind of
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised the storefront still remained open 19 years later. I feel like Sony and Nintendo do a much swifter job of shutting down their storefronts on older consoles than Microsoft seems to have done.
I mean, for sure, right? We not that long ago, we talked about how the Wii U and the 3DS storefronts went down, and the 3DS was only what? That was like 2012. Is that right? 2012?
Yeah, I think so. Wii U was like
2011 maybe?
2013.
Yeah,
So
so, much less time than 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 nearly 20 years that Xbox 360 enjoyed. And, I mean, I think on one level, it probably makes a lot of sense because I wouldn't be surprised if there were people, still using it well into the Xbox One generation. A lot of people use it as like a multimedia device. I think in the same way that like a lot of Wiis like hung around in people's houses and in their living rooms and stuff for many years prior to smart TVs. I feel like
mhm.
that was probably true for the Xbox 360 as well.
Yeah, I think so. Like we just recently went on holiday and we like rented out a holiday home and they had like a little games room and in there was like an Xbox 360. And it's just like, oh, hello, old friend. And you turn it on and you see like I
Dude,
forgot how many times that interface had changed and it was the one with like all the little cards that like go across and like
yeah.
the avatars on screen like waving at you.
Kind of the precursor to like the modern OS a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But I kind of got nostalgic. I was like, oh man, I missed the Blade UI. Like that was that or the one in between, like the latest generation with the avatars, and where you press the Xbox button and it brought up like the interface with the little mini blades on, and it was like you'd be
Uh-huh.
able to shoot across. Oh,
I
it was so
loved the
good.
blades. That is like such a nostalgic thing for me for like the early aughts. And yeah, just blading through those to get to like the multimedia page so I could connect to my hard drive and watch pirated movies off of it, which we'll talk about later. Yeah, it was such a time and place for sure. So we're gonna kind of look back on all of the consoles like highs and lows. We're gonna also in the back half of the show we're gonna name our 36 favorite games. That's 36 360. We don't have time for 360 games. I don't even know if I could pick 360 games,
I could
but
not. No.
the 36 we could do. So we both came with our own lists, and we're gonna come up with our 36 favorite Xbox 360 games. Because even though the storefront is down, of course, the games themselves live on. So you can at least celebrate the great software from that era, even if you're not going to be able to buy it on that old hardware anymore. So I think like let's start with our own personal histories, right? Like what was your relationship to the 360? I don't know how much we've ever talked about this one.
Oh, I loved the 360. So I remember when we got it, it was Christmas 2005. And I remember like maybe a month or two before, me and my dad just like driving down all the way from Bristol. I think it was to Southampton. And we ended up getting it from some scalper who'd put it on eBay. I think my dad got it from eBay at the time. I don't know how much he paid over the odds for it, but it was like one of the Xbox arcade units. So it was one of the ones that didn't have the hard drive, and you just had to like buy a little memory card for it. And we upgraded that afterwards. Dad bought like the 20 gigabyte hard drive you could slot on the top. And we just pull up there, and he opens his garage door, and he must have had like five Xbox 360s in there. So like he was just like
Yeah.
one of those scalpers who just like bought a shitload of them and were just selling them for profit. Probably
Hmm.
paid for his own Xbox 360 that Christmas, but and then I remember dad opening it up like Christmas Day and like putting Perfect Dark Zero in and just being like amazed by the graphics coming from like the Xbox and or the PS2.
Real quick, this is like kind of an aside since I know we're talking about 360, but I have like a vivid memory of my cousin did that one year with the PlayStation 3. It was like when the PS3 was brand new and he had bought it to resell it so that he could like offset the costs of
Mhm.
his kids' Christmas gifts. And I was, I that was what 2006. So
Would have
I'm
been
I'm
would have
probably
been
like
like 2006, 2007, yeah.
yeah, so I'm probably like 12 or 13 at the time. And I wanted one so bad, and, if you're a longtime listener, like, I was a I never really had a PS3, right? Like, I got it at the tail end of the generation. I missed out on most of the PS3 exclusives and stuff, and I wanted one so bad, but, like, my parents were just like, "Absolutely not, it's too much money, not gonna happen." And he, like, pulled me aside and was like, "Oh, check this out." And I was like, "Oh my god, like, are you giving me a PS3? Do you have a PS3? Can we play it?" And he's like, "Oh, no, I'm selling it." I was like, "Why'd you even tell me? Why'd you even tell me? I could have just not known."
Isn't that wild though that the 360 came out pretty much a whole calendar year ahead of the PS3?
Yeah, right,
Like, what an
2005 versus
absolute
2006.
yeah, like, what an absolute kind of win for Microsoft to just come out, and, like, it's kinda crazy, and then the price point on it as well. They had that mod like, the arcade model that I spoke about, or you could buy the one with the hard drive that there was different price points.
Yeah, there's a reason that that's the kind of one generation that we saw Xbox in first
I
place,
kind of
right?
feel
Something
like
we
they would have carried that through to the Xbox One era if they hadn't have fucked up so badly with, like, the Red Ring.
I think it honestly has more to do with the Xbox One.
And the Kinect, yeah, and the price
Yeah,
point on that.
I think that the reveal of the One was what really killed their momentum more than anything, because as much as the Red Ring of Death was, like, a huge problem and obviously, like, something that got cost them a lot of money and garnered a lot of, negative press, I do think they handled it pretty well given, like, what a massive failure it was, and, it didn't, dissuade people from buying an Xbox 360 over the course of that generation, right? It was like it was a problem for early adopters, and then the later versions of it didn't really have that problem. And yeah, like I mean, folks like me, you might have to buy two or three Xboxes over the course of that generation, or get them repaired or whatever. But I think I don't think the vast majority of people like were left with a super bad taste in their mouth. I don't think that that was like the thing that like like painted Xbox in this bad light. I do think it was when they released the Xbox One, they say all the wrong things. They're focused on all this stuff that isn't video games, and PlayStation had the very, very clear. I think in the same way that the 360, it was just a clear value proposition of like,
Mhm.
yeah, okay, do you want to spend twice as much money for what is basically the same console, right? So you can
Well, and
play,
in the case of the 360, it had so many exclusives on it that, I'd forgot about that it was, like, only for Xbox 360.
yeah,
Even if they were, like, timed exclusive, things like BioShock, coming to the 360 first, Oblivion and Skyrim, in my mind, they're, like,
Mass
360
Effect.
games. Yeah, Mass Effect, like, all of these big titles. I think even GTA came to 360 before it came to the PS3. And it's just like all of these games, but I don't think something like Uncharted could really kind of beat off. It's like, oh man, Xbox really came out with a force in that
I think that's the
generation.
thing is like, I think that there are like a lot of really exceptional exclusive PlayStation games. And I think that like in retrospect, it's easy to be like they had more exclusive, they had better exclusives. But to your point, a lot of these games were exclusive at the time, right? Or like Skyrim is an example of a game that like wasn't exclusive, but the PS3 version was notoriously like
It was worse, yeah.
it
I
was
had problems with the saves, like as you saved more, it like got slower and laggy.
yeah, it had like a memory, problem, and it could lead to your save getting ruined, and a lot of people just wouldn't play it over there. So I think there was like a lot of those games that when you think back on that generation, maybe they eventually came to PlayStation, but at the time, like, if you wanted to play those games, you needed to be on Xbox. I think the bigger thing though was that the kind of like focus on online play, right? Because
Yeah.
obviously they were really early adopter of that with the Xbox and having Xbox Live on the OG Xbox. But 360 was where that really came into its own. And I think that that was like, it happened at the kind of exact right time, right? Not only was it the cheaper console and, had some of these really attractive exclusives. It was also the rise of the first person shooter. So like games like Call of Duty and Battlefield and all these other games that were like really really dominant at the time. Let alone Halo and Gears of War and the other like proprietary ones that they owned. That like if you wanted to play first person shooters online, you were playing on Xbox for the most part, and for a lot of people, that was the most popular video games to play at the time. And if your friends were playing, they were probably playing on Xbox. So you got an Xbox. And I think then the other side of that was like just the innovation of the Xbox arcade, right? And again, these are like things that like PlayStation offered in their own way that, they caught up on in some ways. But, the original PlayStation store on PS3, you had to open a browser on your console, right? Like the
It was
experience
an
of,
afterthought. It wasn't truly integrated like
yes,
the Xbox marketplace
I
was,
think
and
the
I think
Xbox
that's where
set the standard for what modern console OSs are with the
yeah.
360, right? With being a multimedia device, with being having a focus on online and having like a deeply integrated online system. Achievements, right, was also a major innovation. And then, of course, the rise of the indie game, right? Like I remember at the time, like how much conversation there was about like the downloadable titles that were available on Xbox. And it was just something that you didn't really see across the fence, right? And I think that yeah, those are all these little things that lined up to tee Xbox up to be number one, and in a way that that we've never seen them be able to achieve before or since.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, and I don't think we ever will, because it seems like they're moving away from the console. It feels like Xbox 360 really was their peak, and they've definitely shifted strategy, at least in the last year. We've seen them even the last month really do a deal with Amazon where you can buy like an Amazon Fire Stick and get like a controller with it, and they recommend playing games without a console now. And it's like, oh, maybe this is kind of the beginning of the end for the actual Xbox console. Whereas I think that would be a real shame. But yeah, well, I've had my console since, well, we had one of our Xbox consoles since 2005. But what about you?
I was a bit of a late adopter. With that generation, it was kind of like an interesting crossroads, I think, for me as a gamer, right? Because kind of before that generation, I owned like every console, right? Like that was the previous generations that I had experienced. I had every one of them, and I was like very deeply into each ecosystem, right? And the 360 was definitely like a change for me in part because I couldn't afford to get a PlayStation 3 and my parents weren't willing to spend the money for it. And then my friends all got entrenched in the Xbox ecosystem, right? So like I remember my, few friends that were early adopters, right? Like when we were going over to their place and playing games, we were playing on 360. And I was a fan of Halo, and there was just all these little things that were like, okay, like I think the 360 is going to be the way to go, because I can actually get one, and I've already got friends that are there playing it, and there are games that I know I want to pick up, right? Like I was interested in getting BioShock after playing the opening at a friend's house. So I actually got it in 2007. I got the Elite.
Wow.
That was
Okay.
my first console. That generation was the Xbox 360 Elite. So yeah, I was a little bit of a late adopter, and I
So
had
you went straight in, you missed out on some of the flaws of that first original console, because that first console
yeah,
didn't have an HDMI port, didn't have built-in Wi-Fi. You had to buy, like, a weird little adapter, and you had to use
dongle.
the component cables to plug it into your TV if you wanted, which was fair enough, because I don't think many people in 2005 had an HD TV anyway, but probably by 2007, people were moving to TVs with HDMI.
Sure, and I was not quite there yet. Like was still on standard definition when I first got it. I actually don't think it had the built-in Wi-Fi. I think that was the third model that
Oh,
came
the Slim, the Xbox
because
360S,
I do
yeah.
remember having the little dongle for Wi-Fi and was like, wow, this is so high tech. That I don't have to run cables through my house or whatever. And Yeah, so that was my inroad, and like you, I ended up experiencing the Red Ring of Death and kinda going through a few iterations of trying to deal with that, over time, where, like, my elite ended up getting it a couple years in. I paid this, like, local game store to fix it, and it worked for another, year or so before it started being a problem again. I ended up buying a used one from
I'm
GameStop.
guessing that did the same thing.
Same problem, yeah, and I
Yeah.
bought it and it was, like, very cheap. I bought, like, an arcade unit that had no brain or anything just so I could plug it in and hope that I could just keep going, and that lasted me maybe another year or whatever, but I think it was still under warranty because I was, like, expecting it to be a problem, so I ended up going back and returning that one, getting my money back, and then just buying the new model. That was, like, the final redesign that they did that cured the problem. It was the one that had the, like, you touch the button, it was like the little bing, and that
Well,
was the one that had the
they did
built-in
one after that,
library.
which was the E model, which was, like, after the Xbox One had come out, and it looked like an Xbox One, which was really weird,
Oh,
and, like,
okay.
nobody
I don't
bought
remember
that
that
thing.
one.
But the S was, like, the shiny, glossy black plastic one, and you
Right.
press the button, and it
Yeah,
made
that
the
was the
noise.
last one. That's
Yeah.
the one I still have to this day, right?
Oh,
And,
man.
but yeah, man, I mean, that one was, like, a really interesting time for me because that generation was really, really influential for me, Like, going into that generation, I was still actively a gamer and was like, playing new releases on my PlayStation 2 and GameCube and everything like leading up to that release. So it's like I was still actively playing games, but I definitely had a bit of like a decline in my interest in them overall around that time because I was like a preteen to young teenager. I was spending a lot of time outside of the house, like hanging out with friends. I had moved to a new town and was like meeting people, and I was interested in girls. That was when I was first getting into playing music, and I like started a band, and so it very much became like gaming was more of a social activity than not. It was more like I was playing multiplayer games with my friends. I was, playing games with friends in the room together, that kind of thing. But I wasn't spending a ton of time like sitting down playing like single player, prestige type experiences until the 360 really activated me again. And it was like getting into games like Batman Arkham Asylum and Dragon Age Origins and a few other games that I'll shout out when we get to making our list that like really really brought me back into it. So I have so much nostalgia and affection for the Xbox 360. But also not even just for the games. Like I was talking about how it was kind of my first like home multimedia device as well because prior to like streamers or any of the kind of like modern like smart TVs, any of the stuff that we now kind of take for granted, that was how I watched things too. It was
Mhm.
like I had a 1 terabyte hard drive that you needed to plug into the wall because it needed
Needed
a
power,
power
yeah.
supply, and it was something that like my high school girlfriend had gotten it for me as like a Christmas present, I think. And I had this massive library of movies and TV shows and stuff, and, like, I had, like, old cartoons that hadn't been leveraged for streaming IP and stuff like that yet, so it was like, my house was one of the places to always go hang out, and we'd go and we'd play Halo or whatever for a while. We play Smash, and then we would like be like, "All right, great. Like, let's take a look at what's on Pete's library. Here's all the new shit he downloaded since the last time we were here. Like, let's watch this old TV show we haven't watched since we were kids that you can't watch anywhere anymore. And he's got bootlegs, or I would here's this new movie, that whatever, right? And um, that was like such a game changer for the way that I was interacting with media at the time, and I honestly think it was the most I ever felt connected to, like, my digital library and having that sense of, like, ownership. The 360 was just, like, such an all-in-one device for me, and I think that it was really, like, a special time, in games because I think it was, like, kind of the last bastion of, like, the pre-internet,
Is that a
like
game on your list, Bastion?
no, it's not, but it's a good one. Of that, like, the pre-internet, always online, like, back when consoles were more analog, but it also
Yeah, because
has
this was the last generation where some games you didn't need to install them on the hard drive. There
Sure.
were a couple, and I think it was GTA 4 that may have been the first one that was mandatory that you had to install it on the hard drive. But prior to that, you could just put the disc in and play it. You didn't have to download the
There
updates.
was
You
a
didn't.
feature where you could install the game to the disc and it would, like, improve performance. Do you remember
Yeah.
that? That was a thing.
But I don't know, I don't think it was mandatory. You could
No.
still run the
No, you
game
could do it if
from
you
the
wanted.
disc if you wanted to, which obviously you can do now. Most of the games that aren't even on the disc, it's just like a license key.
Right, and I think that's, like, exactly what I'm getting at is, like, I feel like it was, like, this crossroads period of, like, it's the early, kind of innovation of a lot of the things that we take for granted now. And I think that you have a lot of the benefits of modern consoles, like day one patches and like being able to fix bugs and things like that, that you just didn't have previously, right? And it's like that was obviously a really cool thing. And then now that's kind of evolved into this. Well, the games aren't on the disc, and every game has like an 80 gigabyte day one patch, and all these things that like now we complain about, right? And I think this was this interesting kind of like middle ground between those things. And it's similar where it was like it was the rise of Xbox Arcade and indie games, and like you have the benefit of those innovations without some of the baggage that's kind of come with them as they've become more standard, right? Like um I think I was thinking about this with like regard to genre, right? Where like this was a time where there was new kinds of games coming out, like the games as a service, like the online multiplayer shooter, like really came into its own during that generation. Obviously wasn't created then, but that was where when it really evolved into what it is now,
Yeah,
right?
because I definitely remember playing some back on the original Xbox, like 13 was my game. Like I would
Sure.
plug into
Or the original
Xbox
Halo,
Live. Yeah, the original Halo as well. And there were some over on the PlayStation side. They experimented with the PlayStation Network. There was that SOCOM game.
Final Fantasy Online
Twisted
was
Metal Black as well was over there as well.
yeah,
And like the Dreamcast had done it all before that with like Fantasy Star
right.
Online.
But this was like where we got what we think of online shooters being today, right? Of
Yeah.
like jumping on, like getting in the lobby, like that very like standardized kind of like this is,
If only Nintendo would follow that.
yeah, right. Three generations late, maybe we'll get there. But again, you saw old genres that had already kind of been popular and established, like reach new heights, like the open world game, right? Like really hit its stride during that
Mhm.
generation. And then I also think that you saw a lot of genres that people had kind of written off and decided were dead, like get revived, right? Like platformers and um shoot 'em ups and tower defense, like all these kinds of games like coming back to console after not being there for generations because it was like, how do you charge a full boxed price for this kind of game? And the answer was that you couldn't, right? And we, through the innovation that Xbox and the arcade team brought, like, they ushered in like a whole new generation of games.
And like charging for emulation as well. Like I remember playing a bunch of Sega games that you could just play through an emulator. I feel like it was the first era that truly embraced emulation and sold games to you as emulation. Like the Simpsons arcade game, for example, you could buy that and you could just play it, and that's obviously emulated.
And, like, I remember there was stuff like Sonic Adventure games and,
Hmm.
like, Psychonauts, and, yeah, it was like there was a ton of these, I guess at that point, retro games.
And
Um,
I think the backwards compatibility with Xbox games was all emulation as well, in the same way that it is still on the Xbox One and then the Series X. That's all done through emulation. It's
yeah,
kind
so
of crazy.
I just think those were all, like they were such meaningful innovations, and it led to a device that was so, like, versatile, and just had so much going on. Speaking of
Yeah.
versatility, like I want to talk about the accessories a little bit. Like I know we talked about the Wi-Fi adapter a little bit. I think for me, the thing that I loved the most about that console was the removable hard drive. I still think that's a feature that we could benefit from. It was so cool to be able to have a friend, or if you had a new game, if they had a new game, come over to your house. All they had to bring was a controller and the brain of their Xbox, and they could just slot it in, and you didn't need to re-download the game. You didn't need to worry about, whose account you were logged into or what, like it was just like, great, like I have this game with all the DLC or all the characters unlocked or whatever. Let's just plug it in and play. And like at the time, like as a teenager, that was like very frequently having friends over to play games or going to somebody else's house to play games for the day. we used it all the time. It was such a feature that got a lot of play between me and my friends.
I mean, you can still do that to a certain extent on the Xbox side. There are those expansion cards, but I don't think anyone's really bought them because they're so expensive. And you can also offload games onto an external SSD drive with USB, but it definitely doesn't have that level of accessibility that the Xbox had. It isn't
It was
just
plug and
press a
play.
button and pull it out the top.
Yeah. It felt like very similar to like what we like about the Switch, right? Where it's
Yeah,
just like, yeah, the box is the dock. It's like the brain is the hard drive.
I do think there's probably concern that now I don't think that would ever wash. They want you to buy the game. And also, the majority of games we're playing are online games these days. So it's like you're gonna be at home on your console while your friends at home on their console.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're probably right. But at the time, something that I really liked.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember the thing that first blew me away when I played the console was like the wireless controller and it being like the first console I had used with a wireless controller that actually worked. Like all the way back on the PS1, I wanted a wireless controller. And I remember buying one of these things and you plug it in and it was like IR and you had to like point the controller at the little IR dongle that was plugged
Yeah.
into the PlayStation 1. But this thing just worked. You put two double A's in
Did
there
you ever have a Wavebird
and it
on
just
the
works.
GameCube?
The Wavebird, yeah, I never
'Cause
had one.
I think that was the first good wireless controller. Like, that thing worked really well.
Yeah, but I feel like the Xbox 360 kind of set the standard. Like, you look at the
Totally.
360 controller now, it's not too dissimilar from the controller that we've got on the Xbox Series X now. You can definitely see the lineage from that controller moving forwards, and I know it was a riff on the Xbox controller, the S model of the original, but it's a
It
man,
was much improved,
it
though.
was much improved. We got bumpers instead of, like, weird little black and white buttons. We got, like, nice triggers on there that was not on the PS2,
Did
she
you
came from
remember,
a
like
PS2.
did you remember, like, how funky the shape was of it at first? I was, like, looking at old pictures, and I kinda forgot it had, like, a weird, like it was, like, a little oblong, and it had, like, a
Yeah,
weird, like, kinda, like it looked kinda shiny. Very, like, odd build quality of the original controllers, but the kinda later ones that we got feel, like, very similar to what we have now, right? Like, it's, like, almost this direct lineage between that controller and the controller we're still using.
yeah, yeah, and, like, you can buy a plug and play kit today, you could buy one then, plug the thing in, you can charge this, like, rechargeable battery in there, it's the same kind of approach that they follow now.
So let me ask you, here's another, like, silly one. Were you a faceplate guy? Did you ever have a custom
No,
faceplate?
I
Me neither.
wasn't. No, I remember seeing them in shops for about 6 months, and then they disappeared, and I feel like nobody gave a shit about them. It reminded me of, like, Nokia phones. It was just like, we were doing this back then, and then we kind of all grew out of it, and we're just like, "Okay, cool."
I had, like, one friend that had one. Like, I had one friend that, like, had gotten, like, a collector's edition of, like, Gears of War 2, I wanna say, and had, like, the Gears faceplate and was like, "Oh, it's cool." But it was, like, the only person I knew that had one.
Yeah, and with they kinda had a renaissance now on the PS5, right? You can get
Yeah.
those side panels. It's not too dissimilar from that
No,
anymore,
it's
but
pretty cool.
I remember there was a few that I really thought were cool when they came out. You remember, like, the wooden one, and it looked like the bottom of a skateboard, and then there was the one where it had, like, green circles around the
Mhm.
power button, which I thought was really cool. So there were some really cool ones, and man, if you look them up, like, online now, some of them, like, if you want original ones in packaging, are very expensive for
It's a
collectors.
very cool thing to collect, I feel
Yeah.
like, you know? Like, I could totally see having a collection of those just as, like, a isn't this, like, a fun, obscure thing, right?
Mhm.
I dig it. So I think the only other one that I wanted to call out, before we, like, I guess, talk more about games, unless you have any other anecdotes to share, is, there was one thing I always really wanted, but I never got, which was the keyboard.
Yeah,
That
me
was for
too, yeah.
Messenger that could, like, plug in your controller so you could have a type pad. Because man, typing messages to your friends on that was such a pain in the ass,
It
and my
still
friends.
is today. It still is
Yeah.
today, and I just never bother. I always just send voice notes.
Oh, that's funny. Me and my friends would do it all the time. Like, we had like it was like a thing we would do to each other. Like, if you saw your friend was online playing a game and like, whatever, like we would jump in and just like send each other like silly messages, so that it'd be like you're in the middle of a cutscene and it's like pops up and I'm just like, "Hey, what's up?" It's like we would and it's like nothing like we would always just like send each other like goofy, like it'd be like, "Oh, dude, yeah, you gotta get over to, Craig's house," like, whatever. Just like very like stupid, like total non sequiturs to be like, let me distract you from this game that you're playing. It's just like
Yeah, I know,
a
yeah.
very like stupid childish thing that I remember doing all the time. Would be like, oh, this is so funny. I've sent him this long ass message.
Mhm.
It was a good time. So how about you? Any other stuff you want to call out before we move on?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I never had a Connect, and I remember the HD
Me
DVD
neither.
attachment, but that obviously went nowhere, and it looked like a tiny little Xbox 360, which I thought was weird. But yeah, I just have such fond memories of it. I do remember the avatars coming in on the Connect, and I remember
Yeah.
when I because it was my dad's Xbox account because he set it up for me when I was a kid. And I wanted to play online on the Xbox, and you had to be like 13 to create an account. So my dad made it in his name so I could go online. And when I got my Xbox One, he like let me take over the account, and it was like my avatar that I'd made when I must have been like 14 or whatever, and it looks like nothing like me at all.
Dude, I have such a vivid memory of my avatar on 360. I remember being really annoyed because, like many character creators, you could not dye your hair a fun color. So, like, the characters never look like me. But I did have a nice big mohawk and I had a Spider-Man shirt, and I was very pleased
Mhm.
with that.
Man, isn't it sad that that's what Rare ended up doing? Like that was what they were
Yeah.
doing in the 360 era was shitty Connect games that no one was really interested in, and making avatars.
And turning Banjo-Kazooie into a racing game.
Oh, just awful,
It's a
awful
tough
era
time.
for that studio.
Tough time. Yeah, that's for sure. That acquisition still makes no sense to me, by the way. I've always thought it was really weird that Xbox ended up being the one that acquired Rare. It's never quite made sense to me. It still doesn't seem like a great fit.
I
Obviously,
kind I kinda
obviously,
got
Sea of
it.
Thieves is really cool.
Yeah,
And
at the
whatever.
time, like, I do kinda get it because like, they were launching a new console, they were getting into video games at the time, and, like, they wanted some family-friendly titles to bolster up what they had. Like, they had the
Yeah,
partnership with Sega, and they brought over, like, Sonic Adventure, Crazy
but
Taxi.
it's just like, why wouldn't you just have them make a normal game in that style then, and not a bunch of weird like phoned in bullshit?
Well, Grabbed by the Ghoulies was cool on the original Xbox. That was a cool game that was meant to be originally released for the GameCube, and then it only came out on Xbox, obviously.
Yeah.
And Rare Replay is a really cool collection. Like
Oh
I
my
I
god,
do
yeah.
like that
I
collection.
It's just like Nintendo fumbled that bag so hard. It's really weird that Nintendo didn't buy them. I think that is
Yeah,
probably one of the biggest mistakes they've ever made by like a lot.
I do too. But man, Perfect Dark Zero, as bad as that game is, being the launch title for the 360, like what a win for you! Like it's a game that people know and love from the N64 era. It's like a beloved IP. It's a beloved character, and you launch like a console with like this HD shooter.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I get why Xbox wanted to be in the Rare business. It's just like I just feel
They
like
let them stagnate, and that's a
yeah, they
problem.
did a really poor job of managing the studio after they acquired it. I think is
Which they did with a lot of studios. You saw Ensemble Studios close down the Age of Empires studio. We saw Bungie basically jump ship and become their own thing and just leave Halo behind. And like they just did not do a great job.
no. Yeah, and it's like you can't help but wonder like what the trajectory of Rare would have been if they just stayed with Nintendo. But
Yeah,
that's
or
that's a
just
conversation
independent.
for Nintendo Noise. Yeah, yeah, good point. So I want to get into our 36 favorite Xbox games, but before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of July. For the last time, they are Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobe, Snackago, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and also Boobies, Voodoo Vic, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. I have to ask this now that it's like come up. I feel like we asked it once before, but I don't remember the answer. Voodoo Vic, is this a Voodoo Vince reference? Because if so, how appropriate for our Xbox centered podcast today? Do you remember Voodoo Vince?
I don't remember Voodoo Vince.
It was
No.
a third person action platformer starring a voodoo doll that was an Xbox exclusive.
Well, I think we should just rename that game Voodoo Vic, and we should like Photoshop it
Okay, we could do
in
that.
homage to Voodoo Vic.
We could do that. We could do that. All right, so let's jump into our top 36 best. Oh wait, I didn't say the rest of the stuff. FlipScreen.games. That's the website. Go over there and click on some stuff. Thanks for joining us. You're great. Go check out our episode 51, our 150 celebration from last week, or Nintendo noises this week if you want some cool stuff in your feed. Go check it out. Thanks for tuning in and joining us. Excuse me. I'm so excited to talk about these Xbox 360 games. Totally threw myself off. So here's what we're going to do. We both have 18 games. We both got a little more than that in case there's crossover, but we both are going to come with 18 games to pitch for the best 36 games on Xbox 360. Xbox 360, 36 games. The marketplace is no more, but the titles live on. So, Steve, why don't you go first? What's your first game to get on the list?
My
And,
first
and I just
game,
want to say they're going to be unranked.
yeah. But my first game that I'm absolutely 100% making sure is on the list is Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. This is the game when I think of the Xbox 360 is the game I think about. Me and my sister must have spent hundreds, if not thousands, of hours playing this game over and over again. We were obsessed with the unofficial Elder Scrolls wiki and like finding absolutely everything in this game. I remember talking about it with friends in school and like being like, "Oh, have you found the like skeleton key so you don't have to do that stupid lock picking mini game every single time," which was a pain in the ass in Oblivion. And I just loved this game, and in many ways, I think it's better than Skyrim. I loved like the arena stuff you could do. I thought it was really cool, just the environments and the variety between the different cities within Cheydinhal compared to the cities in Skyrim. I think it's probably my favorite game on the Xbox 360 by far.
That's awesome. This was one of the games I bought at launch, and I just bounced off of it. So
Oh man,
I've
that's
never
such a shame. That is
Yeah, I've
such a shame.
never played this one. Yeah, my history with Bethesda games is definitely spotty. Fallout 4 was the first one that I actually totally rolled credits on, which is crazy
Wow.
because I put like 60 hours into other ones, but yeah, this was one that I never quite got around to. Okay, so I'm going the opposite strategy of what we did for our top 100. I'm with you. I'm gonna pitch the games I care about the most up front, and we can work our way down. And I don't want to have anything get lost on the list this time. So I'm gonna start things with Dragon Age Origins. We've been talking about Dragon Age a lot lately. I don't need to reiterate this one too much. But Origins is one of my favorite games of all time. It's still incredible. Nearly 20 years later, I think it was a really, really pivotal game for me in terms of like getting back into the hobby in a big way. And it's just one of those games that left an absolutely indelible impression on me. And it's a game when I'm not, near a playthrough, I think back to it often. And it's a game that every time I go back to play it again, I am astounded by how exceptional it is and how much the magic that I felt back then, I still feel it now.
Yeah, and I know you're super excited about the new one coming out later this year in September. If you've listened to the FlipScreen Games podcast, my predictions can be bang on.
I hope
Um,
you're right. Because I'm like probably 2 days away from being done with Dragon Age Inquisition right now. So
are you playing any others after that, or is that the last one that you're
that's the
gonna
last
play
one.
before?
So I,
Yeah,
I there's a DLC that I've not played that I'm gonna get to play. So I'm gonna probably beat the final boss tonight, and then I guess I have two DLCs to play. Um, one of which I did play before. So I've got a little bit more to go, but I'm very, very near the end of it. So if it's out in September, I'm like right there, baby.
nice.
Take a little diversion to play Star Wars, and then I'm right back in drag. It sounds great. All right, what's your
And
next one?
another game I really think of when I think of the 360 is Geometry Wars. It was
Nice.
a
That was on my
game that
list too.
it originally came out on the Xbox as like a mini game, Project Gotham Racing 2, and then they did it as a launch title for the 360
Wasn't it
via
technically
the
Geometry Wars 2 on
no, it's
360?
Geometry Wars Retro Evolved is
Okay.
the name of the kind of remaster they did. But man, this is like the start of one of those like super simple games where you just use the sticks to play. I can still hear the sound of those fucking little blue triangles coming at me or whatever they were. Oh god, it was so good. I still play these games every now and again now, like Geometry Wars. I think Geometry Wars 3. Yeah, they're just such good
It
games.
was free too, which was awesome.
And then like you oh god, when you just like nuke the whole screen with the right bumper and you're just like, yes,
Yeah.
see you all. or like there's black holes and you'd like shoot the black holes and everything would kind of get sucked into it and you had to avoid it. Oh, such a good game.
Yeah, absolute banger. Absolute banger. I will okay, you know what? I'm gonna put forward another arcade title. I want to shout out Castle Crashers. So, if you're not familiar, Castle Crashers is by the Behemoth, which is the team probably best known for Alien Hominid. But it's like the two of the co-creators of Newgrounds founded the studio, and this was their first like post Newground. Like they had taken Alien Hominid, which was originally a Flash game, and made a console version of it. This was their first like from the ground up developed for consoles game, and I love this game. This was my favorite game on Xbox Arcade. My friends and I played this game all the time. I downloaded every bit of DLC. I did a complete new game plus run through with every single character in the game. It, yeah, just this game is so much fun. If you like side scroller like beat 'em up couch co-op games at all and you haven't played this one, highly recommend it. It's definitely a game that just has so many hours of fun to be had. It has a great sense of humor and a lot of like cool secrets to unlock and explore. And yeah, I think this is one of the best games in its genre and a game that like you can regularly get for like $1 or 2 on Steam. Definitely check this one out.
I'm gonna stick with arcade titles, and my next one's Uno. And I just distinctly remember coming home from school pretty much every single day. And I would come in, and my mum would be on the sofa playing Uno on the Xbox 360. She is not a big like console gamer. She never has been. She played PC games. She loved Diablo, and she's like an iPad gamer. She play fucking Candy Crush or whatever on her iPad all the time. But man, Uno is just so good, and the version on the Xbox 360 I don't think has ever been beaten. Thankfully, I managed to avoid seeing people on the Xbox camera doing things they shouldn't be in Uno, because I know that was a big problem with this game. But yeah, I love Uno.
I totally bypassed that whole thing somehow. I don't know that I'm gonna get to this game on my list, so I do want to just shout it out now. And I'll reserve the right to include it later. But similarly, I had that relationship with Risk Factions. I don't know if you ever played that. It is my favorite digital version of Risk. It's so fun, and it was like, um, every like faction was represented by this like these cartoon characters. So like there were like humans that were all these like American army guys. There were these cats. There were like robots. Yetis I think was one of the other ones. And like you had all these like really cute little animations that would like fire between like the combat and everything. This was like a huge in rotation game in my my hangout space. Like my friends and I would get together and play this all the time.
What's your
So we'll
next
see.
one that you're gonna
We'll,
get on the list then?
we'll see if I'll get it on the list if we get there. I want to put up my next one is going to be speaking of rare, Viva Pinata. Uh,
Oh, nice.
Absolutely adore Viva Pinata. It is, I think, a really exceptional game. It's very unique. There obviously there's plenty of like slice of life, gardening, farming, whatever type sims or whatever. But I think, as somebody who has always really enjoyed like creature oriented stuff, right? Like even since before I got into Pokemon, like I've always liked the idea of like making friends with like weird animals and stuff. And that's the whole thing, right? It's like you have to like create this ideal environment to attract all these different species of pinata. And it was just like the ultimate like chill out cozy game. Like I have such vivid memories of the first job I ever had. I worked at an ice cream shop for the summer, and I was like a busboy and a scooper, and I would like work until like 2 a.m. like every night, go home, play Viva Pinata until like 5 in the morning. Uh, and like I left my Xbox on, so it was just on, so I could sit down and keep playing it.
Oh, no wonder it red rings so many times.
That was the good one. That was after that. It was okay. I think anyway. Maybe not. And yeah, and I just remember like having that. It was like a ritual. Like I'd come home from work, I would sit down, I'd play Viva Pinata for a couple hours, and I'd sleep till 2 in the afternoon the next day or whatever. And, yeah, it's one of those games that just I have so many fond memories for, and, like, an IP I would love to see them revive.
My next one is the orange box. It's kind of a cheat, but I loved the orange box. I loved playing Half-Life 2 on the Xbox. I think it's a great way to play it.
Fucking
Portal,
incredible value
really
that was,
incredible
right? It's like 3 of the, like,
value.
best games of all
Yeah.
time. I was like, "Damn, what a collection."
Portal, Team Fortress 2. Oh god, it's such a good collection. And I constantly go back to play Portal. It's one of my favorite games of all time. It's a great environmental puzzle game. It's just yeah, it's phenomenal. And yeah,
Literally,
you're right. Incredible value.
my only connection with those 2 franchises comes from watching my best friend play them on the orange box
Oh,
on 360.
man, you've gotta play them. Like
I know.
that's such a
Big
hole
gap.
in your gaming history. Yeah.
Hey, I made a pitch for you on, if you go play Dragon Age of Veilguard, you can tell me to play whatever game you want. I'll play Portal 1 and 2, baby.
I
Been
don't think I'd get you to play Portal if you've seen someone play. You've kind of got your fill of it, but
a really long time though. I was like 13 or something, so
yeah, they're greite games, really great games. I hope we get another one someday.
be nice. Okay. I'm gonna throw out another favorite of mine, which is Red Dead Redemption. I think Red Dead Redemption is arguably the best game that Rockstar's ever made. I
Nah,
think it
table tennis.
Fair enough. I think it is really exceptional. I think it was a really unique game at the time, right? Like westerns are obviously not a super common genre in video games, let alone in big AAA video games. And I think, being the studio that was best known for Grand Theft Auto and, kind of like making these immersive modern open worlds, I think Red Dead was like such a refreshing departure for them. And it was, I think still has that kind of like in your face like sense of humor sometimes that Rockstar is known for, but I think that, the kind of like I don't know, like there's an element to some of Grand Theft Auto's satire that like just comes off as being kind of like mean and like
Yeah.
it got this very like snarky like Gen X,
I have a feeling that's
13-year-old
gonna be addressed
boy.
in GTA 6. I don't think it's gonna be like that.
We'll see. I mean, it's very I think that is the thing about those games that has aged the most poorly is, like, I think a lot of those sensibilities just don't play anymore, and they don't resonate with people the way that they used to,
Yeah, it's
and I
punching down, and it's just like, people are just sick of that
yeah.
now.
And I think even some of the times when they're punching up, like, it's like, the whole, like, Life Invader thing and, like, 5 where it's like they're making fun of, like, Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. It's like he's a billionaire. They're not exactly punching down by making fun of him, but, like, I don't know, just like blowing someone's head up on like TV, it's like it just feels like a little bit like much sometimes,
Mhm.
And I feel like Red Dead is such a good contrast to that, where it is this very like there are things that are zany and crazy or whatever, but like a lot more of it is quiet and introspective. And there are these great emotional beats, like the first time that you get to Mexico, which Shitty Fu called out in the Discord this week, and I want to do a main topic about his question, so we're gonna save that comment. Um, or like the end. The end is one of the most emotionally affecting experiences I've ever had in a video game. I remember rolling credits on that game and it was like the third time I thought the game was over, and I was like, "Damn, it's really still got more to go? Like, what the fuck?" And then
That's how I felt with The Last of Us Part 2.
yeah. And then you get to that ending, and like I remember literally going and standing in the shower for like 20 minutes, just being like, "What the fuck?" Like just trying to like take it all in. And I have so many fond memories of like exploring the open world and kind of like anecdotal experiences of just like things that you come across and some of the environmental storytelling, some of the like smaller, side missions and the way that they like flesh out the world. Like I just think it's one of the best open world games ever. And I think it has so much, um to offer like from a story perspective that like really, really holds up so well.
It's one
Unfortunately, the gameplay, I think, is the thing that ages the most poorly, that
Yeah, I really
Rockstar's
wish they'd have remade it rather than just remastered it. I think it would
I
they
think it
would
would
have
really
missed out
benefit from
there.
a
Yeah.
remake that kinda, like, I would love to see, like, a Blue Point remake of that game.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Clean it
Uh
up just a little bit.
I'll stick with Rockstar games. I really enjoyed LA Noire. I know a bunch of people rag this game, but
Okay.
I loved LA Noire. I thought it was a refreshing change. I loved the kind of 1920 setting. I thought it was really cool. The innovation they put in with like the facial motion capturing, and granted, some of it just looks like it's ridiculous when you look at it now, but back then it was like really cool, and like
Dude,
having to do the detective work and suss out whether they were lying or not.
that screenshot that people still use of, like, the main character, this is hard to talk about without spoiling things from the game. Uh, the main detective, right? And it's just, like, him with that face, and it's just, like, doubt, like,
And he goes mental at the guy, absolutely mental.
so good. Yeah, that game is an interesting one for me. Like, I liked it a lot, but I never finished it. I hit a point there's a point about halfway through the game where you're, like, solving the mystery and they, like, stop giving you breadcrumbs, and it's very much like, "Now you gotta figure it out." And I remember just getting frustrated with it and just being like, "Man, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do next." And I got a little, like, disengaged from it, but I did really like it. I think that, like, this like you said, the setting was really cool and novel, and this game reminds me in the same way of, like, what I really like about Bully, where it's just like, I just wish Rockstar would make games that are not GTA. I get why we need to keep making new GTAs, but yeah, I feel like they're a studio that could really benefit from having, like, more active teams so that they could like, the way Insomniac does, where they could have more active projects in development. Because I would love if they could have a team that's working on GTA, a team that's working on Red Dead, and then a team that can just work on experimental things like this, and, like, the stuff they did with, like, Manhunt and Warriors and Bully and this, and it's like and LA Noire, and, like, not all those games are good or great, even some of them are okay. But, like, it was fun to see them experimenting and kind of bringing
Mhm.
their flavor of games to different settings and different styles of gameplay, and not just kind of like GTA or GTA with horses, you know?
Yeah, I agree. It's always nice to see studios experiment and do different things, and Rockstar's one of the best.
For sure. Okay, I'm gonna get another easy one out of the way here. I wanna put up Halo Reach. Halo Reach is, I think, it's saying it's my favorite Halo game is loaded, right? Like, there are other games that I think I like the story and the single player campaign better, but this is the one that I have the most fond memories of when it comes to the multiplayer. This is like the last one that was worked on by Bungie, and the Halo 3, Halo Reach era of online multiplayer is like that is when I was most active in online multiplayer. It's when I was playing Halo the most, and my friends and I had like a standing, kind of like ritual of like at night jumping on and playing Halo for a couple hours together, and we would have like a group of like I don't know, 12 of us sometimes. So it's like we would often go in and just play big team battle, but we were an entire big team and we had like a group of like 13 people coordinating or whatever. It was awesome. It was just so much fun. And it's some of my fondest memories of online gaming. And I think that Reach was like had the last kind of expansion of like adding new things to the gameplay without, like maybe getting away from that core kind of, um, mechanical loadout that we were used to, right? That was like where we got the jetpacks and the overshield and all that kind of stuff. And it added a really fun, chaotic element to what was already a really tight multiplayer suite.
My next one is Fallout 3. I don't think it's the best Fallout game by any stretch, but I remember coming into this having loved Oblivion and thinking, "Wow, okay, this is like Oblivion with guns in a different setting," and I just fell in love with the franchise. And since then, it come no surprise, probably Fallout New Vegas is on my list too. And I love the Fallout franchise. It's probably one of my absolute favorites. We've got a TV series this year. Hopefully, we get a new game at some point. But this was the game that really made me fall in love with it.
Nice. This is another one that I tried at that time. And
Didn't like it.
not that I didn't like it, but it was just one of those things where like I feel like I didn't play it long enough for it to get hooks in me. And I just never never like got into it. I used to bounce off games a lot more back then.
You didn't get to Megaton? Like, for me, when I got to Megaton, that was, like, it.
That's the first town with the bomb, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I got there and then like that was where I stopped.
Oh, interesting, okay,
Yeah.
that's when it kind of really opens up.
Yeah, and I think I probably stopped right before it opens up and just, was just never got around to it, unfortunately. Definitely a big gap. Okay, next up, I'm gonna throw out another Bethesda title then. Let's do Dishonored. Dishonored is one of the best games of all time. I personally think it's the best immersive sim of all time. I think Arcane is probably, is arguably the most underrated developer in AAA development. They are exceptional. They make exceptional video games. Their approach to level design is fucking so smart. This game has, I think, one of my favorite levels of any video game, which is the one where you go to there's like a masquerade ball, and there are these three sisters, and one of them is your target, and you don't know who the target is, and it changes every time you play the game. So every time you go and do that level, it can be a unique experience, even if you've played it dozens of times, because there's all these different ways that you can deal with the problem. And um yeah, it's just like what an exceptional fucking video game. I think it's one of the best games on that console by a lot. It was my game of the year it came out. This is a game I go back and play all the time, and I think anybody, if you've never played it, you are doing yourself a massive disservice from not trying it out. And I think that if you're somebody who hasn't played it in a while, it's worth going back and reminding yourself how absolutely exceptional it is. That game could come out today unchanged, and I think it would be a game of the year contender.
Yeah, my ex really loved that game, he was a big Thief fan when he was growing
I
up, and
really think you should give it a shot with how much you like Hitman. I
I
think it would speak
I
to you.
I've played it. I've played some of it. I couldn't get into it at the time. I think it was one of those games like you. I just bounced off of at the time. It just wasn't the game for me at that moment.
I think it'd
But
be worth giving it another shot, you
yeah,
know? Just see
yeah,
if it speaks to you now with, like, you being so into immersive sims, like, try to get a little bit into it, because I think if you get past, like, not that the first level's not great, but I think it's one of those games where, like, it reveals its depth to you as you play, and I think it's very easy to go into, like, the first level or so and being like, "Yeah, it's cool. It's a first person action game," and being like, "No." Like, you gotta get further down the skill tree and, like, figure out some of the way, and again, like playing in a more stealthy, creative way rather than just guns blazing is like there's a lot, and not that it's not fun to play guns blazing. That's a really fun way to play too, but you miss out on some of the depth of the experience.
yeah, yeah. It's just the same with Hitman, right? You can do it either way, and you can go in guns blazing and just kind of brute force your way through. But that's not how it's designed to be played. You're meant to discover the nuance and figure out the way to play.
Yeah.
My next game is Lips. I don't know if you're a big karaoke guy.
Lips?
This was the competitor to Songs SingStar
Okay.
that Xbox put out. I loved Lips, and it was the first time that you could download like packs for it for
Mm.
like a game. Like you could download packs of songs, you could buy them. The microphones are really cool. You got like a black and white one in the box, and they like lit up when you sang. It was like voice activated. And yeah, this was definitely a thing of its time. This and like other rhythm games like Guitar Hero and Rock Band. It was like a real moment, and I feel like people just like bounced off these so hard.
Yeah, we definitely moved away from the, like, accessory-based gaming in the modern era.
Yeah.
Okay, I got another old favorite of mine. I wanna shout out Telltale's The Walking Dead. So
I knew this would be on your list. I absolutely knew it
yeah,
would
for
be.
sure. I love this game. I replayed it like a year or 2 ago and was like, "Damn, this really holds up." Um, I was a big Telltale fan, in the kind of early part of their resurgence, like this and The Wolf Among Us, I think are really great games. Obviously, they had quite a fall off, after those, but, I really do think that the Walking Dead series, especially the 1st season and or 2 even, are really, really good and hold up really well. And I think if you only play the first season, it ends in a way where like the story feels complete. And I don't think you really need to play more. It's like one of those play the first one. I think that's a game you should absolutely give some of your time. But whether or not you continue from there can just be based on your interest. You don't have to have any relationship to the comics or the show. You don't even really particularly need to have an interest in zombies. I think it's just a really well-told story. It has a really good script, and there are some really, uh, exciting moral choices and kind of like, you know, big moments that really feel like they earn their weight, and they really are emotionally challenging in a fun way.
Next one on my list is BioShock. I remember
Nice.
being
That one's on
amazed.
my list, and I was waiting to see if you would say it before I would.
I remember being amazed by this game when it came out, and like the storyline, and oh god, it was so good. And I don't want to spoil it because I still think if you've not played this game, would you kindly play it? Like you really should. It's just phenomenal. And yeah, like you can really see. I think this is where Skyrim got the idea for having like magic in your hand, like being able to do powers with your hand, like
Sure.
telekinesis, and like the incendiary one where you could do flames shooting sparks out of your hand. It was just so good.
BioShock is just, like, is so good. It's, like, truly, like, a perfect video game, I think. I don't think there are many things that are like like, usually when I say a 10 out of 10, it's a masterpiece, right? Like, it's a must play for a fan of the genre, that kind of thing. I really think this is, like, one of the most perfect pieces of art that I've ever experienced in terms of just, like, having such a clear vision of the story it's trying to tell and having both the narrative and then kind of like the meta narrative of like the game itself and the world and how all of those layers line up. Like it's just exceptional, like in its concept, let alone the fact that it's beautiful, that its imagery and its world are so iconic and memorable, and that the gameplay is really good and really fun. It's a really good shooter, and the way that it creates tension and atmosphere is just like unmatched. That game is so spooky and creepy. And yeah, it's just like every little hallway has something for you to enjoy. All right, I'm gonna do something controversial. I'm gonna knock out 3 games at once
Do it.
because, yeah, they're all in this series, and I wanna talk about them all at once, and it'll save us some time. I wanna do the entire Mass Effect trilogy. I think the Mass Effect trilogy is the best trilogy in video games, and I am happy to stand by that. There is no other game that allows you to so directly bring your progress through to later entries, and the kind of journey you go through from Mass Effect 1 to kind of like um getting your first brush up with what's going on with like the Reaper crisis, to then getting to the third game in the franchise and being like the commander, leading the charge in this giant intergalactic war that's touching every, inch of the galaxy, and having extremely minor forgettable choices you made in the first game have these massive, like far reaching consequences, is just like so exceptional and so rewarding to play. And yeah, I think it's, one of the best scripts of all time. The combat is really fun. Some of the best voice acting performances of all time. It's truly one of the great epics in video game narratives, and I think Mass Effect 2 is among the best games ever made, for my money. So yeah, this is one that I think everybody owes it to themselves to engage with this, and to really give it an earnest shot, because I think if you can get through the kind of slog that is the beginning of Mass Effect 1, which is admittedly a slog. It's an old game, and there are things about it that are dated. But if you can get past that and engage with the story, like you will be so rewarded in the back half of that game, and then when you get into Mass Effect 2 and beyond. It takes a little bit of an investment, but I think that yeah, it's so exceptional and so impactful as a story. It's one of those games that just it's never not been on my mind since I played it.
Cool. Yeah, I keep meaning to play it again, but I just have never got around to it after I bounced off the slog that was Mass Effect 1.
I really feel like you had the same experience I had, where I played the first, like, 10 hours of it, and I was like, "I don't know about all this," and then
Yeah.
like, go back into it, don't start it over, just, like, I could recap everything that happened, and just keep going, and get through the first couple missions, because it's so worth it. It really is, and I really think you would fall in love with it if committed to playing it.
Well, I'm gonna do what you did, P. I'm gonna put 2 on the board. They are Seen It and 1v100 or 1 versus 100.
Seen
Um,
it? Come on.
Seen It is there because
You're ridiculous.
I fucking loved those little buzzer paddle things, and this was the only way you could get them. And then once you had them, you could use them on a bunch of games. 1 versus 100 being one of them, and 1 versus 100 was so cool.
That's a great shout out. That one's a great shout out.
Like so cool, just like like probably the first game I can remember where you're playing with 100 other people, and we've
And it was
since
like a
seen
live
that.
event. You had to like tune
Yeah,
in to play it and it was like so weird and like yeah, innovative.
yeah, just really really cool idea, and yeah, I think it's one of those things that we just don't see anymore. Maybe we see it within Fortnite where everyone's going to like a Lady Gaga concert, but it's kind of not the same. It was really cool,
Yeah, it
and a
was
thing of its
very
time.
strange. Yeah, for sure. So ahead of its time that there's never been another thing like it. You want to put one more so that we stay even?
Yeah, can do. I'm going to put Forza Horizon on the board. This was the beginning of Forza moving from just being motorsport into this like arcade open world game. Not the best Forza Horizon game by any stretch of the imagination, but still, I think it deserves a shout out here for kind of paving the way and being the first on the 360. I think probably 3 or 4 are the best, and they were on the 360 and the Xbox One.
Okay. I'm gonna do another twofer just to get series out of the way. I want to shout out Batman Arkham Asylum and Batman Arkham City. So Arkham Asylum is another one of those like very very formative games for me. I talked about how Origins was one of the games that kind of reignited my love for video games. This was the game I played directly before that. It had been a while, maybe a year or so since I had played like a proper like sit down, AAA single player game like that. And one of my best friends to this day, Andy, is also a big comic book fan and had played Arkham Asylum and was like, "You need to play this game. Like, you need to make time for this game." Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill and Harleen I can't remember her last name, but the original voice of Harley Quinn, all reprise their roles, and it's like literally the voices from the childhood Batman cartoon that you watched, and it's like the best Batman game ever made. You've got to play it. And I remember the night I started it so vividly because I sat down to start playing with I was supposed to go hang out with my girlfriend at the time and ended up like plans fell through and I was like, "Oh, I'll start this game while I wait for her." And then like 4 or 5 hours later, I was still playing it. Absolutely, like, just one of those games that I is so exceptional and I think still holds up really well. I also really like Arkham City. I think it was a really good, like, way to take the franchise to an open world and, like, get you more of that kind of classic Batman experience of, like, being on the edge of a building and jumping down and all that kinda stuff. Loved all those things. I still think Asylum is probably the better game overall, but I have a lot of fondness for both of those games for sure. One of my favorite open world games on that console.
I'll blast 3 out again. They are Peggle, Bejeweled, and Plants vs Zombies. I loved all the PopCap games on the Xbox 360. I feel like they are something that we've lost since EA acquired PopCap and kind of moved away from making this kind of game. They were all phenomenal games, and just like yeah, I miss these kind of smaller titles we
I feel
just
like the
don't get
Plants
anymore.
vs Zombie series like really fell off, which is a shame. It was really cool in the
Yeah,
early days.
they were
It's
really
it's
cool games.
gotten kind of tired at this point. Okay, so you did 3, so that means I guess I'll do 3 as well. Okay, my next one, I'm just gonna get another franchise that I love out of the way, and I want to throw out Dragon Age 2. Uh, for many people, this is a divisive one. I think after like the standard that the first one set, people were expecting something different from this game, and I think that has and the changes to combat and stuff like that are all things that led people to I think judge it harshly at the time. But I've always been a really staunch defender of this game. I think it's exceptional. I think it has a really great story. I think it has a great cast of characters. And I think that, it being a more digestible experience is something that is not a bad thing. I think it has a lot going for it. And I would really love if people were, more willing to kind of revisit it now and with, you know, um, without that bias. Because I think it's a game that like if you go back and play it, you'll realize how great it actually is and how much it has to offer. Okay, so then next up, I'm gonna do Far Cry 3. This is my favorite Far
Oh,
Cry game.
shove Far Cry 4 on there for me as well then, because we've had this argument over on the last week's episode, as to which one our favorites were, but Far Cry 4 was on my list as my favorite.
That was cross gen. I remember that being a
Yeah, it's cross-gen,
okay.
it's on 360.
I think of that as like a PS4 game. So
Yeah.
that makes sense though. It was an early one. Yeah, I mean we both really like Far Cry. I think 3 and 4 are the two best games in the series. I think like which one you prefer kind of comes down to personal preference and what about it you're connecting with. I think 3 has the better story, 4 has the better systems and gameplay. So you can't really go wrong. I think these are like two of the best open world games. It's my favorite first person shooter franchise in terms of like the game feel. And yeah, I mean, this was a game that like kind of came out of nowhere for a lot of people, me included, and it really made an impression on me. And it's one of those games I love to go back to, just because it's so much fun to just get in there and take out outposts and just enjoy that like very visceral combat. Okay. So next up, I'm gonna shout out Super Meat Boy. This is another one of those kind of Xbox arcade classics. I think of this as being a PlayStation Vita game because that's where I played it. But this was definitely one of those like early um, arcade titles that really like I think set the standard for what indie games could be and showed that like, there was that time where it was like, oh, it's good for a downloadable game. And like this is one of those games like this and Fez and some of those other games that like Braid, right? Bastion that like really like showed what indie games could be and that they could be a game of the year contender, that they could be something that, you know, lived shoulder to shoulder with those AAA titles.
Yeah, you mentioned Braid, that one was on my list. I remember being, like, blown away by, like, the rewind mechanic. But I'm gonna call out 2 other Bethesda games, which I don't really think we need to talk much about, which are Skyrim and Fallout New Vegas. They were both 2
Yes.
games that I loved on
Skyrim was on
the
my list as well.
console. Everyone's played Skyrim. Fallout New Vegas, I think, is widely thought as the best game in that franchise. And, yeah, they're 2 games that I fondly remember on the 360.
Isn't it wild that New Vegas has just still never been ported? Like why don't Fallout games get ports? Why did they port Skyrim like 6 times but Fallout doesn't get ported?
They just don't sell as well, I think.
But like they're on the top of the sales chart this year from the TV. Like, it's like do they not sell because you don't port them? Like
Or do you need to? Like, do you need to jazz it up, or can it just play in backwards compatibility with, like, you know,
you
the
probably
frame rate boost?
could, but it's like it's also like a very old game at this point. Like why not slap a new coat of paint on it for a new generation, you know? That's my 2 cents. Okay, so what are we even now or do I owe one more?
You owe
No.
one more, and then yeah, I think we're even now. So yeah, we're good. It's your
Oh
go.
no, because wait, hold on. Because you did 1, 2, 3, and then I did 1, 2. You added a fourth one. I added a fourth one. Then you did 3. So I have 3 more, and then we're done.
Okay, that's good. You go.
Okay. Who? Okay. Okay. I want to call out Left 4 Dead 2 specifically. I love Left 4 Dead 2. It is an exceptionally fun party game. This was another one that was like I have a lot of fond memories of like jumping in to voice chat with a group of 3 friends and being like, "Let's see how far we can get tonight. Let's see how far we can get tonight." Um, infinitely replayable. One of the best games of that generation for sure. I want to call out another indie darling that it's maybe easy to forget was one, which is Minecraft.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
where I played Minecraft. Minecraft was a 360 game for me. It was like one of the like games that me and my ex would play together a lot, and I had like a couple different like we had like a solo world, that was like the first one that I had built up. We had like a couple different like we would generate a new world and then pick a part of the map and then build out a big settlement and try to create like a sustainable environment. And yeah, it's just it was something that at the time was very like fresh, right? Like the whole like procedurally generated worlds were kind of like a novel thing. And I remember the first time I played the game, it was with my roommate in college, and we spent like hours because we had like dropped down into the underground, and we're like, how deep does this go? And we just kept digging and digging, and it was like it literally doesn't end. Like, what the fuck? And we were just so like enamored because we had no idea that it was. We didn't know that it was procedurally generated. We didn't know that there was this whole hierarchy to getting to the void and all. Like it was just we were just there exploring this endless environment, and it was like just one of those very memorable gameplay experiences that I'll never forget.
What's the last one for the list then, Pete?
I'm gonna buck the trend. I'm gonna represent a genre we don't have on the list, which is Marvel versus Capcom 3.
Okay.
Fate of Two Worlds, I guess, was the second version of it. This was my favorite non-Smash fighting game that generation. I really enjoy the Marvel versus Capcom franchise. I think two is really exceptional, and three was just one that like my friends and I played a lot. It was in very heavy rotation for many years, and there are like bark lines from that game that like I still fucking like think of. I still hear in my head, like just because we played it for so much time. And yeah, it's one of those games that like I think people still play it to this day, right? Like there's a newer version of Marvel versus Capcom that like didn't connect, and like this one still gets played at Evo. This one still has a community built around it, I think, because yeah, it's just a really good fighting game with a really cool cast of characters and a great art style.
Awesome. Yeah. Good list. I think we got a good list. I'm surprised Gears of War didn't make it on there, but otherwise,
I'm
I
not
think
a
it's a
Gears
good list.
guy, so
Yeah, makes sense.
I didn't know if you played it either. I assumed not. So sorry.
I had, and then I got banned from playing it because it was the game that caused my Xbox to red ring twice. So my dad was just like, "You're not playing that game anymore."
That's really funny.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So, goodbye to the Xbox 360 storefront, but hey, thanks for all the memories.
Yeah. Now I got thanks for the memories stuck in my head.
Thanks for the memories. And I think the nice thing, like we said, is that all these games, with the exception of like two or three of them, are still playable.
Yeah, which
So
is good.
make sure you go check them out. I think uh, these are some of the best games of all time. I think this console generation was really influential and like kicked off some of my favorite franchises, and a lot of these games I think still hold up exceptionally well to this day. So yeah, one of these was on your list, or you've been meaning to get it off your backlog, make sure you go give it a shot. All right, folks. Well, thank you for joining us here in another episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast. This was a great time. If you want to write in with your thoughts on the Xbox 360 or your favorite games that you thought should have made the list, guess what? There's a bunch of ways you can do that. Hit us up at flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find links to all the places we are all over the web. However you choose to get involved and show your support, that is the best way to go ahead and do it. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.